how did that impact you? Did you feel like you were going to be limited again? Did you feel like maybe your dreams, your ability to go to medical school was going to be hindered?
It was tears, so many tears, man. Because you look at so many years of working hard and am I gonna make it? Am I gonna make it?
Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. Welcome back to the Authorized Personnel channel. My name is Sultan Ahmed. I'm your host. Thank you so much for joining us again. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We are also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And if you enjoy this video, make sure to smash that like button. My guest on the podcast today is someone that's recently acquired the title of student doctor, Usaid Mahmud. Brother, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I appreciate it. Spotify and Apple Music, that's amazing. You guys better check out the first 2 episodes.
Thank you for joining us. I know you're probably going through a lot of emotions right now. Recently accepted, you're starting in July. But I think that our viewers could really benefit from your very recent experiences going through college, the application cycle, and hopefully you can share some of those insights with us today.
Yeah, I'm excited. Let's do it.
Awesome. So take me through your journey through high school and college. Like, what were your goals? What were you like? Just walk us through it.
So the journey starts in high school as a 13-year-old Usaid was not really caring too much about his future, per se. And I was just not a strong student to begin with in terms of the effort that I was putting in. So my first 2 years, I was in a public high school. And then my junior year, my parents wanted to put me in a private high school. So I ended up going to Islamic Foundation, which is where we met.
Oh, we met, yeah.
And that's kind of when the gear started like moving a little bit. And I started to see this, how passionate students around us were in terms of the career that they wanted to do in the future. So that kind of motivated me to start trying more. Well into my junior year and into my senior year, I started doing better and better. Started getting better grades and performing well academically overall. Unfortunately, because I didn't have as strong of a background my first 2 years and a little bit of my third year, I wasn't as strong of as a candidate when I was applying for different four-year universities. And for that reason, I didn't really get accepted anywhere. So that was really heartbreaking. I remember it was like mid-March when I found out that the last chance I had at going at a 4-year wasn't going to work out. And I was devastated. I'm like, I have this newfound passion of wanting to go to medical school, which kind of started in senior year. And now I didn't even get accepted to any 4-year. What am I supposed to do? I know that I have the potential. I can see it because now I'm performing better in my classes, but my past is dragging my present down.
Right. And that's really rough because it's almost like, what was the point of all that effort if it wasn't going to pan out? At least that's what it felt like in the moment, I'm sure.
And it's not only that, but because I didn't get accepted and I didn't show promise in the eyes of others, I wasn't receiving as much motivational tips or advice from other people because I was like this kid who didn't get accepted into any 4 years and he's probably going to end up doing something else non-school related. But I didn't want that for my life. I wanted to go to college and I wanted to explore if medical school is right for me or if maybe another path is right for me. Admittedly, what first interested me in medical school, which I think it's important that all people hear about this because I'm sure that this is what first inspired, realistically, like at least 80 to 90% of the viewers, is the money.
Right.
I was in class one day and we were talking about psychiatrists and I'm like, I wonder how much psychiatrists make. And I Google it and I'm like, whoa, that's a lot of money.
Right.
But as I'll mention later on in the story, it shouldn't be about the money. There's so many factors when it comes to going into medical school, and there's easier ways to earn that much money or even more money. So really, you need to be able to separate yourself and say, is medicine right for me because I like the career, or am I going into it for another reason that might haunt me in the future?
Right.
Which we'll talk about more into this episode.
Right.
But back to the story.
So we're in community college at this point. Oh no, we haven't gotten there yet.
We haven't gotten there yet, but we're about to. Right. So basically, I could have either taken a gap year, maybe figured my stuff out and see what I wanted to do, or I can start college right away through the option of community college.
Right.
And so towards the end of my senior year, I decided community college is right for me. And part of that reason why I decided community college is because my older brother, Munir, he went to community college, and I saw him, picking himself up in community college and wanting to be an engineer himself, which later on I got to see that he went on to a 4-year university, and now it's his third or fourth year working as an industrial engineer.
That's awesome.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. So seeing his journey kind of inspired me to say, hey, you know what? It's not too late for me. Let me start at community college. I have the 2-year plan of building a stronger foundation for myself, not just in the short term, but in the long term of those 2 years.
Right.
So that I can have a better background and knowledge and foundation as I go into a 4-year.
So I'm glad you mentioned community college, because people tend to downplay how valuable of an asset it is, because community college classes, they're cheaper than your 4-year university on average, and most of the credits won't transfer over. So if you're trying to finish your program sooner, or if you want to maybe get a buffer between high school and college, like you were saying, where you wanted to propel yourself academically because you were on that high of performance, it's a great way. It's a great stepping stone. It's an absolutely amazing stepping stone.
You would not believe how many classmates downplayed me going to community college. Some of them were like, oh, you're not going to make it into medical school if you go to community college. You're not going to be able to do this or that. And even some people who I would have hoped I looked up to as mentors, even they kind of downplayed it too. Like, oh, community college, it's where people go and they don't care about school.
Really?
Yeah. And it didn't sit right with me, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't think that's true. That doesn't sound true.
It should be, yeah.
And so I go to community college. I'm saving thousands of dollars. Thousands.
Right.
Like the cheapest university I've ever heard of was maybe like $12,000 a year. That's like the cheapest.
Right.
And they could range up to like $80,000-$90,000 a year.
Absolutely, easily.
And meanwhile, I'm at community college, and I'm like, if I am paying, I'm paying like a very minute amount. I'm able to more than manage my first 2 years of a 4-year undergraduate program, able to do my gen eds, able to be close to home, and smaller class sizes as well sometimes too, which help with academics.
Right.
But
so just because I want to touch on this point a little bit, what's the benefit for someone that's maybe entering college? What's the benefit of a smaller class size?
For one, you get to have more interaction with the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have like 100 students in your class,
right,
and you need help from the teacher one-on-one, chances are there's going to be multiple times where they're either going to say, I'm sorry, I can't take your question. Or if they do take your question, they're going to rush it. And sometimes it's a question that can't be rushed, And it's not necessarily that the teachers in those big class sizes want to rush it. It's just they have to cater to so many other people. And sometimes also in those big classes, you might not feel as comfortable to ask a question that you might have.
Right.
Versus in community college, I remember I was in my chemistry classes. There was 20 people, 15, 20 people. Same thing with biology. My gen bios, there was maybe 10 or 15. It's amazing because you take this class that can potentially be complex, especially your freshman year, sophomore year. I want to say all years because there's classes here and there that's always going to be complex. And you have the opportunity to take it in a smaller class size where you have more chances to ask your questions, more chances to get help from the teacher with specific issues that you're struggling with, and more connections overall with other students too.
Right.
In a bigger class size, you might not be able to do that as much. You might be able to, but it's harder.
It's harder.
It's harder. I'm sure with med school, and other universities, and I know it too. I mean, I've been in classes where my cell biology class in my junior year had 90 students. So I remember that one was more so getting help outside tutoring rather than with the professor. So I was able to find my way that way, but sometimes it could be a challenge.
Right.
So overall, community college was going great. I was able to build a better foundation, better base overall. Even then, though, I kind of met some classmates who were a little bit discouraging at times. I'll never forget this. It was my freshman year, general chemistry, and I was in my group. It was me and three other people. We were kind of like, while we were doing the lab and setting up the apparatus and all that, we were talking about what we had in terms of goals. And when it was my turn, I was like, oh, I want to go into medical school. I remember the girl in front of me was like, oh, you're going to quit after the first year of pre-med. You're not going to be able to make it. And the other two are like, yeah, trust me, pre-med is rough. You're not going to, especially if you're here, your chances are very slim. Oh, yeah. And I still remember that exact moment to this day.
It's got to burn.
In fact, I remember the person in front of me, she was like, oh, yeah, I was pre-med at first too, but then I kind of came to my senses and now I'm in nursing. And I'm like,
What? Well, isn't that the same route?
Similar.
I mean, obviously, I know it's different, but isn't that the same field? So, like, what's? I don't know.
To this day, 4 years later, I'm still trying to make sense of it myself. So, that was one of the few comments that I would hear back in the day, here and there.
Right.
So I go on into community college. I'm doing well, especially my second, third semester. I find myself working while I'm studying, and I'm actually managing and doing well. And then it comes time to start applying for universities. So I started applying, and I noticed a big shift. Whereas before, because my past was holding me back, I didn't get accepted into any universities. Now I'm like getting accepted to Loyola, UIC. I got accepted to Northeastern, Benedictine. I had gotten accepted to one or two other universities. I can't remember off the top of my head. And I'm like, whoa, I've proved to myself I can do it in the long run.
Right.
I've proved to the colleges that I can do it in the long run, and I can build a foundation. This is really nice. It was a different feel. It was my first ever major proof to myself that, no, I can do this. I can become a doctor. I don't care what anybody says. I'm going to keep going forward. So in that route, I had to make a decision. And I ended up choosing one of the private universities. And from there, it was...
What made you decide on that university?
I decided on that specific university because I heard about a lot of other students from my high school class that went there. And I went there also because there was a big Muslim population, which was personally important for me, among other reasons as well. And so I ended up going to that university. But it was kind of tough for a number of reasons. As I started, one of the things that I underestimated big time was the financial aspect. So I kind of took tuition into perspective, but then an hour and a half driving each day eats up gas, the I-Pass tollway, food, school supplies, and those are just like the major stuff. There's a bunch of minor stuff that also added up as well.
Right.
But I didn't want to give up, so I kind of kept going. I got a job as well with it. And I was working in the alumni hall, but I remember it was really tough because it took away time from what I wanted to spend with studying with classes. Because I was taking genetics, organic chemistry 1, biostatistics, and a few other classes.
Those are some heavy classes.
It was a pretty tough semester. And I remember I was so humbled that semester because I remember it was so tough. I had to manage so many things at once. Here I am managing my classes, but I'm also trying to work so that I can pay off bills and trying to, pay off insurance, pay off other things. But ultimately that took away time from studying. And also the hour and a half round trip going to and from school. I know there's some students who could do it. That's, if you can do it, great.
That was me.
There you go.
It was 40 minutes one way for me. So 40 minutes, so that's an hour and a half round trip, essentially.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. Because just because someone is not strong at something, it doesn't mean the other person's not going to be strong at it.
Oh, no, I love driving. So that 40 minutes, I would listen to lectures, podcasts, whatever it was.
There you go.
Yeah.
For me, I like doing that sometimes too, but at the same time, I don't know. That I guess I also struggled with that because some of my professors, especially my biostatistics professor, he had very limited time in terms of office hours.
Right.
And there were times that I needed to speak with him about maybe getting help with a certain topic or something. And that kind of took away from my studies overall. So now Fast forward to the end of that first semester at the private institution. I've struggled so much, managed to pass all my classes, but, kind of, I want to say not barely, but, it was ultimately my lowest performance in undergrad at that point in time and in general, actually. So I hit a low point.
When you entered community college and you saw how well you performed before you started applying for these universities, and then suddenly all these places accepted, your application, it was almost a boost to your morale because you had the low point in high school and you felt like you were held back. When you had this tough semester, how did that impact you? Did you feel like you were going to be limited again? Did you feel like maybe your dreams, your ability to go to medical school was going to be hindered?
Kind of. Bro, it was so emotional. Like, I can't even put into words what I went through. But what I will say is this. My brother has served a big part of helping me get back on track. And I've noticed these things before, but that was the first time in my life where I'm like, nobody does this on their own. Nobody. I don't care what you say. You need a support group in order to thrive.
Absolutely. 100%.
And so he talked me into plan B, which was going to a university that was closer to home, cheaper tuition, much cheaper. It was like maybe a sixth of tuition.
Oh, wow.
And it was a 15-20 minute drive from home. And so I started the semester and I'm like, okay, let me try it out. Straight A's my first semester. Straight A's my second semester. Straight A's my third. Going into my fourth. And this is, I'm like, whoa. So I really did just have a low point in my life. And now it's like coming back. Only this time, I understand all the fixes that I needed to make. I understood that how important a support group is. But I also had this chance now to revive the dream of becoming a physician.
That's awesome.
It was, and then my last semester, I had 21 credits. I was taking 21 credits, and I revived the Muslim Student Association Club at my school too. So I kind of saw it as a challenge. I'm like, okay, let me redeem myself from that low point. Let me prove to myself that I can take this X amount of credits. I can be a leader in my club, and I can still maintain good health overall for myself and have a good support group around me.
So you were trying to test yourself there a little bit.
I wanted to push myself, and pushed myself I did. But
So let me ask you this, because you talked about the MSA a little bit. What were extracurriculars like for you? Because we talked about just boosting your academic performance. And something I do want to touch on, straight A's aren't obviously the only way you get into medical school, right?
Absolutely.
Because you have to be very well-rounded overall. So what were some extracurriculars or some activities outside of classes that you were doing?
Let me just preface by saying that there are people who have a 4.0 GPA, a 528 MCAT, and have gotten accepted to no medical schools.
I can believe that.
I've seen it firsthand on multiple occasions, and I've read stories online as well.
Right.
And the reason why is because although those are two important factors, you need experiences to back up that you can make it out in medical school. Medical school is not just academics.
I mean, you have to be human.
You have to be human. You can't be. They don't want a computer for
right.
one. But also, medical school is not just academics, right? It's also rotations, and it's also being able to actively listen to the patients, be compassionate with them, and learn that compassion through leaders that are here today, that are already physicians, and other important qualities that you need as a physician. So for me, how it started for me was the first 2 years of college, my experiences were mainly in a hospital setting, a clinic setting. I also volunteered in something called Hearts for Humanity. So I kind of took charge of that. And it's a branch off of an organization called Muslim American Society, or MAS. And basically this initiative was to raise money for a certain cause.
Right.
So I remember this cause was there was a desert in, I think it was California. I can't remember the desert name, but there's a lot of homeless people living there. And so it was a nationwide kind of initiative to raise money for that. So I took initiative in the month of March to kind of like co-lead that program. We were hosting different events to raise money. So that was like mainly my first 2 years. I also wanted to shadow a doctor as soon as possible. However, I didn't have anybody in my family or friends group that I could look at who were either doctors or had families who were doctors that I could shadow.
Right.
I didn't have any connections. I was even told, and I don't know if this is necessarily true, but I was even told that you can't shadow your own primary care doctor, and that won't count as experience. I don't know if that's necessarily true or not, but I didn't want to take the risk. So I never really got to shadow my first 2 years. And it was so unfortunate because I was searching. But eventually, towards like around my junior year, I got to shadow an amazing physician, Dr. Ihtisham Ghani, who you know as well.
Awesome doctor.
Amazing physician. And he's an internist, and I got to see firsthand what he does, and I got to hear the patients as well.
Right.
And I'll never forget some of the patients would often say, there are primary care doctors around my house, but I drive 30 minutes because I specifically like you. And I was like, whoa, the fact that a physician can have that much of an impact. So I loved that. And so I shadowed him for a few days, amazing experience. And then it was time to broaden my experiences a little bit. So then I wanted to shadow in pediatrics because pediatrics was one of my interests. And I also wanted to find specifically an osteopathic physician because I wanted to go to osteopathic medical school, which we'll touch on in a bit.
We'll touch on that. Don't worry.
We'll get into it.
We'll get into it.
But that was a whole other roadblock. It's one roadblock finding an MD to shadow. It was a whole other roadblock to finding a DO to shadow.
So let me just ask you this question because I'm curious. Was it a roadblock to find a DO that practices osteopathic medicine or just find a DO in general?
Although I was interested in learning about OMM and I preferred it that way, I wanted to find a DO in general so that I can also talk to them and ask them questions, figure out what's the differences between MD and DO, because that was one of the questions that I had as I went into the application cycle. And I was searching, and I couldn't find anything. So what I started doing was I started calling clinics. That didn't help out that much because, I don't know, calling is not the same as going in person.
Right.
I contacted multiple people, including you.
Right. I remember I told you about this.
And I contacted other people as well. And I was having a tough time until one day I'm like, okay, you know what? I have 2 weeks before I start my job. I'm going to use every single day to kind of like visit different areas to ask them in person if there's any way that I could be able to shadow. Right. Because I wanted it that badly, and it wasn't working out with just calling. And keep in mind, the pandemic is still kind of fresh, so there's a lot of extra restrictions. Right. Eventually, I go to one of the hospitals that's by my house. It was like the third or fourth hospital that I'm trying. I go to the head of this specific pediatric unit in the third floor. And I remember asking her, and I remember her not only telling me that the physician was Muslim, which I was like, whoa, but that they would be more than happy for me to shadow. And I was so happy. It was like after searching, I finally found a DO physician to shadow. Right. And I got to shadow her eventually. It was really nice. There wasn't that much OMM, admittedly, that she was using. There was some, and she would like often talk about like holisticness for the patient, which I really enjoyed, because some doctors, as you know, they might not treat like a patient whole in the whole.
They'll treat the symptom.
Yeah, and they won't really care about anything else. But I've also scribed for a lot of other physicians who look at the patient holistically, which is something that I valued so much. And seeing her do that in the pediatrics unit.
So one thing I actually want to touch on, because what you're saying is really important. The difference between a good doctor and a great doctor is someone that focuses on, let's not just treat what you're coming with, but what's causing it. And I think I really noticed that difference with Dr. Ghani, because when you say I have X, Y, and Z problem, he'll pull up a laundry list of, okay, let's make sure it's not this, and this. and he does the homework to make sure that you're actually healthy.
And you don't want to be the type of physician, which is unfortunate these days, there's a good amount, that will say, okay, you have this problem, here's these pills. And it's not.
Sometimes that is the answer.
Sometimes that is the answer given,
right.
and I'm glad you clarified that. But sometimes some physicians that I've noticed, they'll overdo it to the point where it's like, oh, you have this thing that can easily be treated elsewhere, maybe like with OMM, for example, but without asking them any questions is what I'm trying to get at. Like digging deep as to what might be causing that issue in the first place. They just like, okay, here's this medication kind of thing. And it's not healthy for the patient. That's for one. I know you mentioned good doctor versus great doctor, but even then, is that a good doctor, or is that because sometimes the patient has nobody.
Right.
And this is something that I realized working as a medical scribe. I work specifically in geriatrics, so we focus mainly on 65 and older. A lot of our patients have nobody.
Right.
They don't have children, or maybe they have children, they're just not in contact with them. Siblings have passed away, parents have passed away, they're all on their own, some of them living in nursing homes. And so their only source to vent to is the physician.
Or the providers that are coming in.
Or the providers, the nurse practitioners, the PAs. And so when they go in and they're trying to vent, and then the physician's like, sir, you have hypertension. Let me refill your medication. Oh, you have this, that. Have a nice day after like 5 minutes.
Right.
Versus I've noticed another physician that I've scribed for. He would take even more time than allotted. Because at the end of the day, he's like, no, I want to make sure this patient is good, and they've adjust all their everything that they have in their mind. And I want to make sure that whatever problem they have, we're fixing the root of it. We're not just touching the surface of it.
Absolutely.
And that spoke volumes to me. And that's kind of also why I chose osteopathic medicine, is because of the value they put into treating the patient holistically and looking at everything.
Right.
Sure, it might take a little bit more time. It might be a little bit more training when it comes to school, but more training will hopefully mean
a wider skill set.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we talked about your experiences with extracurriculars during your time in college, and I'm sure that it's a lot longer list than we discussed. We talked about medical scribing, which I'm sure gave you a much more defined view of what medical lifestyle is like, and probably impacted your decision to, or maybe even strengthened your decision to go into medicine. At what point did you start preparing for the MCAT, which is the entrance exam for medical schools?
So for me with the MCAT, what I first started doing was I started studying during the end of my junior year, or towards like the middle to end of my junior year of university.
This is the last university you moved to, right?
Correct. So I started studying there, and then I was like, okay, I'm taking like this many credits, and included is biochemistry, which is not an easy class in undergrad.
Not at all.
Let me focus on finishing that, and then I'll focus more on the MCAT.
Sure.
So I did that, and then on the summer, I started studying for the MCAT. It's going pretty good. I was improving. But by the end of the summer, I'm like, I'm not at the point that I want to be at. Let me take a brief pause again, take care of the 21 semesters, my final semester in university. And then after that, during like that last portion of the semester, I'll focus on taking my MCAT while maybe working and gaining a few more experiences and stuff. So I started studying for the MCAT again. I took many practice exams. I took the MCAT, and then during the third week of Ramadan, I got my score back. I wasn't excited about that per se, but at the end of the day, it's like I might have mentioned before, which is the MCAT is very important when it comes to applying for medical school, but it's not the only thing.
Absolutely not.
There's other stuff that they look at too. Admittedly, the MCAT and GPA, they're the two most important things, of course.
Right.
But if you have enough of a solid background, it could make up for it,
Absolutely.
So GPA was one thing for me as I was applying for medical school. My GPA was a 3.75. So that kind of made up for my MCAT, and I had a solid experiences background as well. So I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to take my chances, tawakkul ala Allah, and I'm going to apply. So I applied. I must have had 13 drafts for my personal statement. I wanted to make sure that bad boy was solid.
Right.
Admittedly, I might have been a tryhard too because I used to be an English essay tutor. So,
Okay.
but I grinded on that, made sure my experience section looked appealing and nice. I was fortunate enough to get an MD letter of recommendation for my MD schools and a DO physician letter of recommendation for my DO schools.
How many letters of rec do you need?
From a physician, you just need one.
Okay.
But if you're applying for MD, they want MD. If you're applying for a DO, some schools will say we only want a DO. Some schools will say we'll either take a DO or MD.
Okay.
But all DO schools will always prefer
DO.
a DO,
letter of
pretty much.
recommendation.
It's
Right.
safe to say they'll always prefer a DO because they want to make sure that you understand the difference.
Then I believe you need at least 3 from your undergraduate professors, right? 2 science and then 1 non-science.
Usually that's the
Last I
standard.
checked,
Usually
that's the standard.
there will be some universities who like to, change it up a bit.
Right.
But generally, it's 1 or 2 science and faculty, and 1 person who is either like an employer, maybe a mentor, something like
Okay.
that. But that's generally.
It's been a while for me, so.
No, that's okay. But that's you hit it right on the money. That's pretty much generally the setup.
Right.
So I submit my primary applications, and because I have this new foundation of DO and I want to go for DO now, I mainly focus on DO schools.
Wait, so let me backtrack you there just a little bit because I'm
Sure.
really intrigued here.
Mhm.
DO versus MD. How did you hear about DOs? What sort of brought you towards that aspect of medicine? What made you say, I want to choose DO over MD?
So I'll start the answer like this. There's a few sources of how I heard about DO. I heard about it from you guys, Hamza Ghani, Nabil Ghani, and I heard about Musa going to med school or osteopathic med school.
Authorized Personnel, episode 2.
A very amazing episode. I highly recommend it. Musa's an amazing and incredible person, and I loved his story. What's his name? Omar Jaffrey. I heard that he was going to a DO school as well. And I was like, what's the deal with this DO school? Let me look into it a little bit more. So I later find out that my family friend is also in a DO school. She went to a school in Arkansas, NYTCom.
Okay.
And I kind of like talked to her a little bit about it too. And I spoke to Hamza about it. I spoke to a number of people. I spoke to the DO physician about it. And I did my own research as well. And aside from everything that I mentioned with the holistic and the patient-centered, I loved the idea of learning manipulative medicine. It just looked so cool.
OMM stands for Osteopathic Manipulative Medicine. Yep.
Yeah, and I got to see it in demonstrations in different occasions. I got to see it at an open house in Alabama, virtual open house. I got to see it when I went for an interview in Arkansas.
Mm.
I got to see it in Indianapolis at Marian University, which is where I'm going. And I got to see it a couple of times online as well. And I saw it once in person as well. And it was really cool. And although I haven't been exposed as much as I want to be, that's kind of the drive for me. I want more, and I want to be able to do it myself.
That's fair.
And I remember I went to my open house for accepted students, and they had us trying OMM for the first time. And I was like, with my partner, I'm like, but for some reason that motivated me even more because I'm like, I'm at 0 in terms of what I know how to do, or 5%. I can't wait until I build up.
I love OMM. I love OMM.
I can't wait to do it.
So there's a technique. I remember when we learned the technique, and the first time I got it, and I just looked at my hand, and like, okay, all right.
I can do stuff.
It was really cool. It was really
That's
cool.
the feeling that I want. I want that so badly. I can't wait to start it. And I actually have a friend who's a physical therapist. And when I told him about how DO schools, we can do that kind of stuff, he's like, whoa, you guys do manipulative medicine too? And it was just the conversations that we had and the stuff that, that goes into manipulative medicine and how it can actually potentially prevent the patient from needing to take medication.
Yep. In some cases, yeah, absolutely.
And it can at the very least lift up some soreness and some
Absolutely.
pain, which is amazing. Like being able to do that with your own hands, no machinery required.
Yeah.
The idea, just I can talk about it all day.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really cool to hear that you had such an awesome experience learning about DOs, the difference in DOs and MDs. Going back to the primary application, you were talking about how you were working your way through it.
Yeah. So after you finish your primary applications, which you include which schools you want to apply to, then what the schools will do is they'll do one of the following. They'll either screen you out if you have not met a certain MCAT or GPA, which you guys can look that up. There's like an Excel sheet. You guys can hit me up on my socials and ask me about the sheets. I can hook you up with that. They'll either screen you out because of those two factors, or they will send you a secondary application if they like you. So a secondary application is more so they want to get to know you a little bit more before they potentially offer you an interview.
Does everyone get the secondary application?
Not everyone.
Okay.
Sometimes even if you don't get screened out, you might not get a secondary application.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But to get interviewed, do you have to go through the secondary application?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Now sometimes the school will put their secondary question applications on the primary application.
Okay.
So a number of schools, I think PCOM did this, and there's a few other schools that did that as well, where instead of them sending you a secondary, they'll just ask you everything then and there. And once you submit your primary, they'll either reach out to you for an interview.
That's a lot of work.
It was a lot of questions. It was a lot. And I personally applied to about 30 DO schools. So a good 5 or 6 of them right off the bat asked me those secondaries. And for that reason, it kind of took me a little bit longer to submit my primary application. But after that, I started getting my secondary applications almost right away. It was like within a week, and that kind of shocked me because I heard it was going to take like a month. But within a week, started sending me secondaries. It's like, all right, it's go time. Now it's July. I'm working on my secondaries, making sure my answers are on tip-top shape.
Right.
I start submitting. Into July, I submit some secondaries. August, I submit some secondaries. And I think my last secondary I submit was either late August or early September. Actually, it was late August. And the way that I remember that is I was at my job. It had been a few days since I finished my secondaries, and I get my first interview.
That's awesome.
And it was so early, too. It was in August. And I was like, okay. It was a school in Arkansas. It was an in-person interview. Kind of a far drive, but I've never had an in-person interview before, so it was really exciting.
Okay.
And my dad's like, okay, let's go. We'll take the car and we'll go. Went to Arkansas, got to attend my first medical school interview. And 2 weeks later, my lifelong dream was achieved. I got my first acceptance.
Really? That's awesome.
Alhamdulillah. It was tears, so many tears, man. Because you look at so many years of working hard and am I going to make it? Medical school is different because it's hard, it's tough, it's a lot of information, but you see the pathway. When you're a pre-med, you don't see that pathway yet because it's not guaranteed. You haven't gotten that acceptance yet. It's a wavy path. You could be moving straight, but maybe the direction isn't straight. Maybe the direction is left. You never know. And so getting that first acceptance was a feeling beyond bliss. And so now, weeks and months go by, starting to get more and more interviews. And eventually, I got accepted to Marion University, which is where I'm going, Indianapolis, inshallah.
Inshallah, man. I mean, you've had one heck of a journey, and I'm sure that the audience can hopefully benefit, inshallah, from learning about the highs and the lows. One thing you touched on much earlier on that I did want to come back to was this idea of you can't go at it alone. I talked to Musa about this in the last episode as well. When you're going through struggles, the first thing you should do, honestly, is figure out who you can lean on for support to get through it. Because it's very hard to go at it alone.
Yeah. I mean, just to name a few, my sister-in-law who mentored me with the MCAT and helped me out and gave me tips with it. My brother who's been there for me since the beginning, but also understanding the specific struggles that I went through. My close friends who motivated me to keep going with my applications and my interview process and helped me mock interviews as well.
Right.
My other mentors, the people who set the paved way to show that it's possible, people like Hamza, people like Nabil, people like Abdullah Damra, who was also a big help for me as well. And it was just a lesson that I wish I knew earlier, is that the people who are there for you are going to be there in the long run, and it's going to make the biggest of differences.
That's awesome. Any final words for our audience?
Make sure you know that medicine is the thing that you want to do the most. And when you realize that it is, don't let anybody tell you otherwise. You got this. Keep going. Don't let setbacks set you back. And just keep going.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on board, Usaid.
Thank you so much for having me. Hope to come back in a future episode when maybe you're a resident and I don't know, I'm well into med school and I don't know, we'll see.